That is why we need to normalize respectful conversations. We should be able to discuss sexual health with the same seriousness with which we discuss nutrition, mental health, exercise, or preventive medicine. This does not mean every conversation needs to be personal or explicit. It means the subject should no longer be surrounded by unnecessary shame. There is a difference between privacy and secrecy. Privacy can be healthy. Secrecy created by fear and misinformation can be dangerous. A person should be able to seek medical advice without feeling humiliated. A young adult should be able to ask a qualified professional about contraception without feeling judged. A couple should be able to discuss testing without turning the conversation into an accusation. And anyone experiencing pain, unusual symptoms, coercion, or fear should know that seeking help is an act of courage, not failure. There is another financial principle that belongs here. Know where your resources are going. In personal finance, small neglected expenses can accumulate until they become a serious burden. Health works similarly. Small issues that are ignored do not always remain small. A symptom may have a simple explanation, but sometimes it may indicate something that requires professional attention. Preventive care is therefore an investment. Regular checkups, appropriate screening, vaccinations where recommended, responsible sexual practices, and honest communication can all be parts of a long-term strategy for protecting health. The objective is not to become obsessed with every possible danger. The objective is to become proactive rather than permanently reactive. I want you to imagine your future self standing in front of you. Perhaps that future version of you is 10 years older, perhaps 20 years older. That person has lived through opportunities you have not yet seen and challenges you cannot yet predict. Ask that future person what they wish you would do today. Would they tell you to ignore your health because the conversation feels uncomfortable? Would they tell you to surrender your boundaries because someone might become disappointed? Would they tell you to avoid a medical appointment because you are embarrassed to ask questions? Probably not. Your future self would likely say something much simpler. Take care of the person I am going to become. That is one of the deepest forms of self-respect. We often think self-respect about how we feel about ourselves in the present moment. But self-respect can also be an agreement between your present self and your future self. It says, I will not knowingly make your life harder just because I want temporary approval today. That principle applies to money, relationships, health, and almost every major decision. The financially responsible person says, I will not spend everything today because tomorrow matters. The health-conscious person says, I will not ignore my body because an appointment is inconvenient. The emotionally mature person says, I will not abandon my boundaries simply because I am afraid someone will leave. Different situations, same wisdom. The future matters, and perhaps that is the message I most want to leave with you as we begin. Your body is not an afterthought. Your health is not a subject to be embarrassed about. Your boundaries are not obstacles to intimacy. Your questions are not signs of ignorance. They are instruments of protection. The more you understand, the more deliberately you can live. The goal is not perfection. None of us will make every decision perfectly. The goal is awareness. It is learning to stop, think, ask, communicate, and choose. It is recognizing that a healthy life is built from many small acts of responsibility. So tonight, I invite you to replace one question with another. Instead of asking, what will people think if I talk about this? Ask, what do I need to know to protect my health and my future? Instead of asking, how can I avoid an uncomfortable conversation? Ask, what honest conversation could prevent a much bigger problem later? Instead of thinking, I already know enough, ask, what might I still need to learn? Those questions can change a life. Remember this. The strongest investment you can make is not always the one that produces money. Sometimes it is the one that protects the person who will earn, love, work, dream, and live tomorrow. Your health is that investment. Your knowledge is that investment. Your boundaries are that investment. And your willingness to make responsible choices is an investment that can pay dividends for decades. As we move forward, we will look more closely at the practical realities of sexual health, communication, prevention, relationships, and personal responsibility. But before we discuss any specific issue, I want you to carry one foundational idea with you. You have the right to seek accurate information, the right to make informed decisions about your own body within the law and with respect for others, and the responsibility to consider how those decisions affect both your present life and your future. That combination, rights joined with responsibility, is where genuine freedom begins. And when you learn to protect your health with the same seriousness with which you protect your money, your career, and your dreams, you begin building something far more valuable than financial wealth alone. You begin building a life in which you are informed, prepared, respected, and free to pursue the future you truly want. There is a moment in many people's lives when they realize that growing older does not automatically make them wiser. Age may give us experience, but experience without reflection can simply give us more habits. Real wisdom begins when we become willing to examine what we believe, where those beliefs came from, and whether they are helping us build the life we want. Nowhere is this more important than in the way we understand our bodies, our relationships, and our sexual health. We inherit ideas from parents, friends, culture, religion, entertainment, and the internet. Some of those ideas are valuable, some are incomplete, some are simply wrong. The challenge is not to reject everything we were taught, but to develop the courage to distinguish reliable knowledge from assumptions. Your health should never be managed by rumor. Imagine two people standing at the same crossroads. One has a map, the other has a collection of stories from people who once traveled the road. Both may be sincere, but only one has dependable information in hand. When the road becomes complicated, the person with the map has an advantage. Sexual health works the same way. Reliable medical information, qualified healthcare professionals, and honest communication provide the map. Friends can offer support, and personal experience can teach us lessons, but neither should replace professional guidance when a health question requires it. A confident person is not someone who believes they know everything. A confident person knows when to say, "I need better information." That mindset is also fundamental to financial freedom. Nobody becomes financially independent by refusing to look at their bank statements. You cannot manage what you refuse to examine. You cannot create a financial plan while pretending that debt does not exist. In exactly the same way, you cannot protect your health by avoiding information because it makes you uncomfortable. Awareness is the first step toward control. A person who understands their health risks can take action. A person who understands their financial position can make a plan. In both cases, the truth may initially be uncomfortable, but uncertainty is usually more expensive than knowledge. One of the most important lessons we can learn is that our bodies communicate with us. Pain, unusual changes, persistent symptoms, changes in sexual function, unexpected bleeding, sores, discharge, or other concerning symptoms should not automatically be dismissed as something embarrassing. Sometimes the explanation is minor, sometimes it is not. The point is that you do not need to diagnose yourself. Your responsibility is to notice, take yourself seriously, and seek appropriate medical advice when something does not seem right. There is enormous wisdom in knowing the difference between panic and attention. Panic says, "Something terrible must be happening." Attention says, "Something has changed, and I should find out what it means." That distinction matters because fear can work into opposite ways. Sometimes fear causes people to become excessively worried about every small sensation. At other times, fear causes people to avoid healthcare altogether. They are afraid of what a doctor might say, afraid of judgment, afraid of embarrassment, or afraid of what the answer might mean for their relationship. But avoiding information does not change reality. It only removes your opportunity to respond early. A financial problem does not disappear because you refuse to open the bill. A health problem does not disappear because you refuse to schedule the appointment. Courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is deciding that the truth is worth knowing. Let me give you a principle that applies far beyond sexual health. Never let temporary discomfort purchase permanent uncertainty. A difficult conversation may last 10 minutes. A medical appointment may take an hour. Asking a question may make you feel awkward for a moment, but the consequences of not asking can sometimes last much longer. We need to stop measuring the value of a decision by how comfortable it feels today. Mature decision-making asks what the decision protects tomorrow. That is why we need to normalize respectful conversations. We should be able to discuss sexual health with the same seriousness with which we discuss nutrition, mental health, exercise, or preventive medicine. This does not mean every conversation needs to be personal or explicit. It means the subject should no longer be surrounded by unnecessary shame. There is a difference between privacy and secrecy. Privacy can be healthy. Secrecy created by fear and misinformation can be dangerous. A person should be able to seek medical advice without feeling humiliated. A young adult should be able to ask a qualified professional about contraception without feeling judged. A couple should be able to discuss testing without turning the conversation into an accusation. And anyone experiencing pain, unusual symptoms, coercion, or fear should know that seeking help is an act of courage, not failure. There is another financial principle that belongs here. Know where your resources are going. In personal finance, small neglected expenses can accumulate until they become a serious burden. Health works similarly. Small issues that are ignored do not always remain small. A symptom may have a simple explanation, but sometimes it may indicate something that requires professional attention. Preventive care is therefore an investment. Regular checkups, appropriate screening, vaccinations where recommended, responsible sexual practices, and honest communication can all be parts of a long-term strategy for protecting health. The objective is not to become obsessed with every possible danger. The objective is to become proactive rather than permanently reactive. I want you to imagine your future self standing in front of you. Perhaps that future version of you is 10 years older, perhaps 20 years older. That person has lived through opportunities you have not yet seen and challenges you cannot yet predict. Ask that future person what they wish you would do today. Would they tell you to ignore your health because the conversation feels uncomfortable? Would they tell you to surrender your boundaries because someone might become disappointed? Would they tell you to avoid a medical appointment because you are embarrassed to ask questions? Probably not. Your future self would likely say something much simpler. Take care of the person I am going to become. That is one of the deepest forms of self-respect. We often think self-respect about how we feel about ourselves in the present moment. But self-respect can also be an agreement between your present self and your future self. It says, I will not knowingly make your life harder just because I want temporary approval today. That principle applies to money, relationships, health, and almost every major decision. The financially responsible person says, I will not spend everything today because tomorrow matters. The health-conscious person says, I will not ignore my body because an appointment is inconvenient. The emotionally mature person says, I will not abandon my boundaries simply because I am afraid someone will leave. Different situations, same wisdom. The future matters, and perhaps that is the message I most want to leave with you as we begin. Your body is not an afterthought. Your health is not a subject to be embarrassed about. Your boundaries are not obstacles to intimacy. Your questions are not signs of ignorance. They are instruments of protection. The more you understand, the more deliberately you can live. The goal is not perfection. None of us will make every decision perfectly. The goal is awareness. It is learning to stop, think, ask, communicate, and choose. It is recognizing that a healthy life is built from many small acts of responsibility. So tonight, I invite you to replace one question with another. Instead of asking, what will people think if I talk about this? Ask, what do I need to know to protect my health and my future? Instead of asking, how can I avoid an uncomfortable conversation? Ask, what honest conversation could prevent a much bigger problem later? Instead of thinking, I already know enough, ask, what might I still need to learn? Those questions can change a life. Remember this, The strongest investment you can make is not always the one that produces money. Sometimes it is the one that protects the person who will earn, love, work, dream, and live tomorrow. Your health is that investment. Your knowledge is that investment. Your boundaries are that investment. And your willingness to make responsible choices is an investment that can pay dividends for decades. As we move forward, we will look more closely at the practical realities of sexual health, communication, prevention, relationships, and personal responsibility. But before we discuss any specific issue, I want you to carry one foundational idea with you. You have the right to seek accurate information, the right to make informed decisions about your own body within the law and with respect for others, and the responsibility to consider how those decisions affect both your present life and your future. That combination, rights joined with responsibility, is where genuine freedom begins. And when you learn to protect your health with the same seriousness with which you protect your money, your career, and your dreams, you begin building something far more valuable than financial wealth alone. You begin building a life in which you are informed, prepared, respected, and free to pursue the future you truly want. There is a moment in many people's lives when they realize that growing older does not automatically make them wiser. Age may give us experience, but experience without reflection can simply give us more habits. Real wisdom begins when we become willing to examine what we believe, where those beliefs came from, and whether they are helping us build the life we want. Nowhere is this more important than in the way we understand our bodies, our relationships, and our sexual health. We inherit ideas from parents, friends, culture, religion, entertainment, and the internet. Some of those ideas are valuable, some are incomplete, some are simply wrong. The challenge is not to reject everything we were taught, but to develop the courage to distinguish reliable knowledge from assumptions. Your health should never be managed by rumor. Imagine two people standing at the same crossroads. One has a map, the other has a collection of stories from people who once traveled the road. Both may be sincere, but only one has dependable information in hand. When the road becomes complicated, the person with the map has an advantage. Sexual health works the same way. Reliable medical information, qualified healthcare professionals, and honest communication provide the map. Friends can offer support, and personal experience can teach us lessons, but neither should replace professional guidance when a health question requires it. A confident person is not someone who believes they know everything. A confident person knows when to say, "I need better information." That mindset is also fundamental to financial freedom. Nobody becomes financially independent by refusing to look at their bank statements. You cannot manage what you refuse to examine. You cannot create a financial plan while pretending that debt does not exist. In exactly the same way, you cannot protect your health by avoiding information because it makes you uncomfortable. Awareness is the first step toward control. A person who understands their health risks can take action. A person who understands their financial position can make a plan. In both cases, the truth may initially be uncomfortable, but uncertainty is usually more expensive than knowledge. One of the most important lessons we can learn is that our bodies communicate with us. Pain, unusual changes, persistent symptoms, changes in sexual function, unexpected bleeding, sores, discharge, or other concerning symptoms should not automatically be dismissed as something embarrassing. Sometimes the explanation is minor, sometimes it is not. The point is that you do not need to diagnose yourself. Your responsibility is to notice, take yourself seriously, and seek appropriate medical advice when something does not seem right. There is enormous wisdom in knowing the difference between panic and attention. Panic says, "Something terrible must be happening." Attention says, "Something has changed, and I should find out what it means." That distinction matters because fear can work into opposite ways. Sometimes fear causes people to become excessively worried about every small sensation. At other times, fear causes people to avoid healthcare altogether. They are afraid of what a doctor might say, afraid of judgment, afraid of embarrassment, or afraid of what the answer might mean for their relationship. but avoiding information does not change reality. It only removes your opportunity to respond early. A financial problem does not disappear because you refuse to open the bill. A health problem does not disappear because you refuse to schedule the appointment. Courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is deciding that the truth is worth knowing. Let me give you a principle that applies far beyond sexual health. Never let temporary discomfort purchase permanent uncertainty. A difficult conversation may last 10 minutes. A medical appointment may take an hour. Asking a question may make you feel awkward for a moment, but the consequences of not asking can sometimes last much longer. We need to stop measuring the value of a decision by how comfortable it feels today. Mature decision-making asks what the decision protects tomorrow. This brings us naturally to communication. Healthy sexual relationships require communication because two people cannot respect boundaries they have never discussed. Communication does not have to be dramatic. Sometimes it is a simple sentence. Are you comfortable with this? Sometimes it is. I would like us to discuss protection. Sometimes it is. I am not ready. Sometimes it is. I changed my mind. And sometimes it is the most important sentence of all. No, a respectful relationship makes room for these statements. No one should have to negotiate against pressure, intimidation, manipulation, threats, or guilt. Consent deserves particular attention because it is not merely the absence of resistance. Healthy consent is voluntary, informed, and specific to the situation. It can change. A person can agree to one thing and not another. A person can agree at one moment and change their mind later. A person who is frightened, coerced, incapacitated, or otherwise unable to freely choose cannot provide meaningful consent in that circumstance. These principles are not about making intimacy cold or complicated. They make intimacy more respectful because they recognize that both people are human beings with autonomy. And here is where boundaries become powerful. We often hear the word boundary and imagine a wall between people. But a healthy boundary is not necessarily a wall. It can be a door with a handle that you control. It tells others what you are comfortable with and what you are not. It also tells you when you need to step back. In financial life, boundaries might mean deciding that you will not spend money you do not have simply to impress someone. In relationships, boundaries might mean deciding that you will not compromise your health or values simply to keep someone's attention. Both require the same inner strength, the willingness to tolerate another person's disappointment rather than betray your own well-being. There is a financial freedom principle hidden inside that lesson. Never finance a lifestyle that destroys your peace. We usually apply that sentence to houses, cars, vacations, or consumer debt. But it applies to relationships too. If maintaining a relationship requires constant fear, secrecy, pressure, manipulation, or financial dependence, the emotional cost may be enormous. Love should not require you to abandon your ability to make decisions for yourself. A healthy relationship can involve sacrifice, compromise, and shared responsibility, but it should not require the destruction of your dignity. Financial independence also teaches us the importance of having an emergency reserve. We save because we know life can surprise us. A car can break down. A job can disappear. A medical expense can arrive. A family emergency can change our plans overnight. In personal life, we need forms of preparation too. Having access to trustworthy healthcare, maintaining supportive friendships or family connections, knowing where to seek help, and understanding your options during an unexpected situation can provide a kind of personal emergency reserve. Preparation does not mean expecting disaster. It means refusing to be completely helpless if circumstances change. One of the most dangerous myths in life is that responsible people never encounter problems. They do. Responsible people simply prepare to respond to them. A financially disciplined person can still lose a job. A health-conscious person can still become sick. A person who communicates well can still experience heartbreak. Preparation does not guarantee that nothing difficult will happen. It improves your ability to navigate difficulty when it does. This is why prevention deserves our attention. Prevention is rarely glamorous. Nobody receives applause for the problems they successfully avoided. Yet much of good health care is built on exactly this quiet discipline. Learning about sexually transmitted infections, understanding how they can be transmitted, using appropriate protection, getting recommended testing, and discussing relevant health information with partners can reduce preventable risks. Vaccinations may be appropriate for some sexually transmitted infections, depending on age, medical circumstances, and local recommendations. Contraception can be an important consideration for people who want to prevent pregnancy. The appropriate method depends on individual circumstances, so professional health care advice is valuable. The larger principle is straightforward. Do not wait for a crisis before learning how prevention works. There is an enormous psychological advantage to preparation. When you prepare, you replace vague anxiety with specific action. What if something happens? Becomes here is what I know, here is what I can do, and here is where I can get help. That shift is empowering. It is the same reason people create budgets, insurance plans, retirement accounts, and emergency savings. They are not predicting exactly what will happen. They are building resilience. Think about the difference between reaction and strategy. Reaction happens after the event. Strategy happens before it. Reaction says, I wish I had known. Strategy says, I learned before I needed the information. Reaction says, I never thought this could happen to me. Strategy says, I understand that risk exists, so I will make a responsible choice. The purpose of strategy is not to eliminate every risk in life. That is impossible. Its purpose is to reduce avoidable risk while preserving the ability to live fully. There is also an important emotional dimension to prevention. Sometimes people avoid conversations about sexual health because they fear that asking questions will imply distrust. But asking for information is not automatically an accusation. Two people can approach a conversation as teammates rather than adversaries. They can say, let's take care of each other. They can discuss testing, contraception, boundaries, and expectations without turning the conversation into a courtroom. The healthiest relationships are not built on the fantasy that nothing difficult will ever happen. They are built on the confidence that difficult subjects can be discussed respectfully, and if someone responds to a reasonable health question with anger, ridicule, threats, or manipulation, that reaction itself is information. Pay attention. A person's response to your boundary can reveal more than their promises about respecting it. Anyone can say, I respect you. The deeper question is what happens when you say no, ask for time, request protection, or express a concern. Respect becomes real when it survives disappointment. Let me offer another original principle. Watch how people treat your boundaries when they do not get what they want. That is a powerful test of character. It applies in relationships, friendships, business partnerships, and even financial negotiations. A trustworthy person can hear no without turning it into punishment. A healthy partner can disagree without becoming threatening. A mature colleague can accept a boundary without making you feel guilty for having one. You do not need to apologize for protecting your health. Now, there is something else we need to discuss: self-worth. People sometimes make risky decisions because they believe they need to earn affection. They fear that if they say no, someone will leave. They believe that setting standards will make them appear difficult. They accept treatment they would never recommend to someone they love. But your worth is not determined by whether another person chooses you. You are not valuable because someone desires you. You are valuable before the relationship begins, during the relationship, and even after the relationship ends. Financial freedom teaches a similar lesson. Your net worth is not your human worth. Your salary does not determine your dignity. Your bank balance is a financial number, not a measure of your character. In the same way, relationship status is not a measure of whether you are worthy of respect. Sexual experience is not a measure of maturity. Lack of experience is not a measure of immaturity. What matters is whether you are making informed, voluntary, responsible decisions that align with your values and circumstances. This distinction can transform the way we think about pressure. Pressure often succeeds by convincing us that we have something to lose. If you really cared about me, you would ... double quotes everyone else is doing it. You are being paranoid. Don't you trust me? These statements may sound persuasive, but they attempt to turn your boundary into evidence against you. You are allowed to pause. You are allowed to ask questions. You are allowed to seek professional advice. You are allowed to say no. You are allowed to change your mind. The same discipline that helps someone build wealth can help someone build personal resilience. Wealth is often created through repeated choices that seem small at the time. Save a little, spend intentionally, invest consistently, avoid unnecessary debt, learn continuously. Personal well-being is also built through repeated choices. Communicate honestly, seek health care when appropriate, protect your boundaries, learn accurate information, choose supportive relationships, and think beyond the immediate moment. A single good decision is valuable. A pattern of good decisions is transformative. So, as you leave this part of our conversation, I want you to think of your health as an asset, not an asset in the cold language of accounting, but in the deepest sense of something that supports everything else you hope to accomplish. Your health supports your ability to work, love, travel, create, parent, lead, learn, and enjoy life. Protecting it is not selfish, it is foundational, and the more seriously you take your health, the more freedom you create for the future. Remember this, you do not build a free life by taking every opportunity. You build it by learning which opportunities deserve a yes and which require a courageous no. That is wisdom in relationships. It is wisdom in health. It is wisdom in money. And it is wisdom in life. Your future does not need you to be perfect. It needs you to be awake. It needs you to notice. It needs you to ask. It needs you to learn. It needs you to protect yourself without forgetting to respect others. Most importantly, it needs you to understand that responsible choices are not restrictions placed upon your freedom. They are the architecture of freedom itself. When you know your body, understand your boundaries, seek reliable information, communicate openly, and prepare for the consequences of your choices, you are not living a smaller life. You are building a life with stronger foundations. And a strong foundation gives you something extraordinary. The freedom to grow without constantly rebuilding what you neglected yesterday. There is a point in every meaningful relationship when attraction alone is no longer enough. The excitement may bring two people together, but what keeps them together is something deeper. Trust, communication, respect, responsibility, and the willingness to tell the truth even when the truth is inconvenient. This is particularly important when we talk about sexual health, because intimacy places two human beings in a position of extraordinary vulnerability. We are not simply sharing time. We are sharing parts of ourselves that deserve care. And whenever vulnerability enters the picture, responsibility must enter with it. The question is not merely, do I want this? The wiser question is, can I approach this in a way that protects both myself and the other person? That question has enormous power because it moves us away from impulse and toward intention. We live in a culture that often celebrates immediate gratification. We are encouraged to buy now and pay later, eat now and exercise later, worrying about consequences later, and make decisions based on how something feels in the present moment. But life has a way of sending the bill eventually. Sometimes the bill is financial. Sometimes it is emotional. Sometimes it is medical. Sometimes it is the loss of trust. The mature person learns to ask a simple question before acting. What happens next? That question is not designed to kill spontaneity. It is designed to protect the life that exists beyond the moment. This is one of the most important connections between sexual health and financial freedom. Financially independent people learn to separate desire from affordability. They may want something, but they also ask whether buying it is consistent with their larger goals. In relationships, we need a similar distinction between desire and readiness. Wanting intimacy does not automatically mean that every circumstance is right for intimacy. Readiness includes emotional comfort, mutual consent, communication, awareness of health risks, and an understanding of possible consequences. You can genuinely desire someone and still decide to wait. You can care deeply about someone and still establish boundaries. You can be attracted to someone and still say, I need more information before I make this decision. There is strength in that pause. The world often teaches us that confidence means acting quickly. In reality, confidence can mean being comfortable enough with yourself to slow down. When everyone else is rushing, the person who can pause has an advantage. In investing, impulsive decisions can destroy years of savings. In health, impulsive decisions can expose people to avoidable risks. In relationships, impulsive decisions can create emotional consequences that are difficult to reverse. The ability to pause is therefore not weakness. It is a form of power. Here is a principle worth carrying with you. A pause is not a rejection of opportunity. It is a chance to make sure the opportunity belongs in your future. Think about how much trouble could be prevented if people simply gave themselves permission to pause before major decisions, before signing a contract, before taking on debt, before leaving a job, before sending an angry message, before entering an intimate situation, before ignoring a health concern. The pause creates space for judgment, and judgment is one of the most valuable assets a person can develop. Healthy sexual decision-making also requires understanding risk without allowing fear to dominate the conversation. Risk is part of life. Driving a car involves risk. Starting a business involves risk. Investing involves risk. Relationships involve risk. The goal is not to eliminate every risk, because that would mean eliminating much of life itself. The goal is to understand risk well enough to make informed choices. When we know what increases risk and what can reduce it, we gain control over decisions that might otherwise feel mysterious. Sexually transmitted infections are an important example. Many people imagine that they would somehow know if they or a partner had an infection. But some infections can produce few or no noticeable symptoms, which means appearance and assumptions are not reliable substitutes for appropriate testing and medical advice. That is why honest communication and recommended screening matter. Depending on a person's age, sexual practices, medical history, pregnancy status, and other circumstances, a healthcare professional may recommend different forms of testing or prevention. There is no universal checklist that applies identically to everyone. Good healthcare is personal because people are different. That principle is worth remembering whenever you encounter health information online. A general article can educate you, but it cannot necessarily tell you what is appropriate for your specific body and circumstances. Social media may present confident answers, but confidence is not the same thing as medical accuracy. If something concerns you, a qualified healthcare professional is a much better source for individualized guidance. Learning to distinguish education from diagnosis is itself a form of health literacy. And health literacy, the kind of wealth. Think about that for a moment. We normally measure wealth in money, property, investments, and possessions. But there are forms of wealth that do not appear on a financial statement. Knowledge is one of them. Judgment is another. Physical health is another. Emotional stability, supportive relationships, and the ability to make informed decisions are also forms of human capital. When you invest in these things, you increase your ability to navigate life effectively. Financial freedom is often described as having enough assets that your money begins working for you. But there is another kind of freedom, having enough knowledge that your ignorance no longer works against you. When you understand your health, you can ask better questions. When you understand relationships, you can recognize unhealthy patterns sooner. When you understand your finances, you can avoid unnecessary debt. When you understand your values, you can make decisions without constantly seeking permission from everyone around you. Let me offer another principle. The person who learns before the crisis has more choices when the crisis arrives. This is why education matters. Learn about your body before something feels wrong. Learn about contraception before you need to make a decision about pregnancy. Learn about sexually transmitted infections before you face a possible exposure. Learn what consent means before you are in a situation where emotions are running high. Learn where to seek medical assistance before you are frightened and unsure where to turn. Preparation is not pessimism. It is respect for reality. There is also a subject that deserves compassion: unintended pregnancy. Pregnancy can be joyful and deeply meaningful, but it can also create significant responsibilities, especially when it occurs at a time when someone is not prepared emotionally, medically, relationally, or financially. Responsible sexual health therefore includes understanding available contraception and discussing pregnancy intentions honestly. Different contraceptive methods have different benefits, limitations, effectiveness levels, and medical considerations. A healthcare professional can help an individual or couple determine what may be appropriate. The larger principle is that major life changes deserve deliberate planning whenever planning is possible. Financial planning provides an illuminating comparison. Few people would advise someone to purchase a home without considering whether they can afford the mortgage, taxes, maintenance, and other costs. Yet major life decisions are sometimes approached with far less planning. Parenthood, for example, involves emotional, physical, practical, and financial responsibilities. Recognizing those responsibilities does not diminish the beauty of parenthood. It honors it. Preparation is not a sign that you love the future child less. It is evidence that you are taking the future seriously. But we must also be careful not to turn responsibility into judgment. People experience unexpected pregnancies, health conditions, relationship changes, and difficult circumstances for countless reasons. Compassion matters. A person who is already facing a difficult situation does not need shame added to the problem. They need accurate information, appropriate health care, emotional support, and practical options. We can encourage responsible decisions without treating people as though one mistake defines their entire identity. This is another lesson from financial recovery. If someone has debt, the worst response is often humiliation. Shame may make a person hide their statements, avoid their creditors, and refuse to ask for help. Constructive responsibility works differently. It says, let's look at the numbers. Let's understand what happened. Let's make a plan. Health challenges deserve the same approach. Let's understand what happened. Let's get appropriate medical advice. Let's determine what needs to happen next. Responsibility is strongest when it is combined with compassion. Now let us talk about trust. Trust is often misunderstood as believing someone without asking questions. Real trust is more sophisticated. Trust is confidence that another person will behave with honesty and respect. Asking about sexual health does not automatically mean that you distrust someone. In many cases, it can be an expression of mutual care. I care enough about both of us to have this conversation. That is a healthier approach than pretending difficult subjects do not exist. A strong relationship should be able to survive honest conversations. If the relationship collapses simply because one person asks for protection, discusses testing, expresses a boundary, or says they are not ready, then the conversation has revealed something important. A relationship that requires silence to survive is not offering genuine security. A relationship that can tolerate honesty has a stronger foundation. There is a phrase I want you to remember. Trust is not built by avoiding difficult questions. It is built by discovering that difficult questions can be answered honestly. That applies everywhere. In business, partners need to discuss money. In marriage, couples need to discuss expectations. In families, people need to discuss health. In friendships, people need to discuss boundaries. Silence may feel peaceful for a while, but unspoken issues have a habit of becoming louder over time. Communication also means listening. Too often we prepare our response while the other person is still speaking. We hear the words but miss the emotion beneath them. If a partner says, "I am uncomfortable," the goal should not be to persuade them out of their discomfort. The goal is to understand it. If they say, "I need more time," respect the request. If they say, "I want us to use protection," treat that as a responsible request, not an insult. If they say, "I need to talk to a healthcare professional," support the decision. Listening becomes particularly important when discussing boundaries because people do not always express themselves perfectly. Someone may hesitate. Someone may become quiet. Someone may change their mind. Healthy communication requires paying attention rather than searching for the smallest possible interpretation that allows us to continue. Consent and comfort should never be treated like obstacles in a negotiation. The same idea appears in financial life through the principle of margin. Financially disciplined people try not to operate at the absolute edge of their resources. They leave room for unexpected expenses. Relationships need margin too. Leave room for another person's feelings. Leave room for uncertainty. Leave room for a change of mind. Leave room for a medical question. Leave room for the possibility that the perfect plan will need to be adjusted. One of the greatest mistakes people make is assuming that maturity means never changing your mind. In reality, maturity often means changing your mind when new information becomes available. If you discover a health concern, your decision may change. If your circumstances change, your boundaries may change. If you learn something important, your understanding may change. Changing your mind after receiving new information is not hypocrisy. It is adaptation. That is why we should never use a person's previous decision to invalidate their current decision. But you said yes before. But you did this last time. But we have already gone this far. None of those statements creates an obligation. Consent is not a contract that cannot be revised. A healthy relationship recognizes that each person retains autonomy throughout the experience. There is an economic analogy here as well. Imagine you invested money in something and later discovered that the conditions had changed. Would a sensible investor say, "I already invested, so I must continue no matter what"? Of course not. A sensible investor reassesses. The same principle can apply to personal decisions. Past choices provide information, but they do not permanently control your future. This brings us to the idea of sunk costs. In finance, a sunk cost is money that has already been spent and cannot be recovered. Wise decision-making focuses on what makes sense from this point forward rather than allowing past spending to dictate future choices. Relationships can create emotional sunk costs too. A person may think, "I've already spent 5 years with this person, so I have to stay." But time invested does not automatically make a relationship healthy. Likewise, "We've already been intimate, so I cannot change my mind now" is not a valid principle. Your future choices remain yours. Your past does not own your future. That sentence is worth remembering. Your past can inform your future, but it does not have the authority to command it. If you made a poor decision, learn from it. If you ignored your health, start paying attention. If you failed to communicate, learn to speak. If you accepted a boundary violation, recognize what happened and seek support. If you trusted the wrong person, do not conclude that you can never trust anyone again. Wisdom does not mean becoming cynical. It means becoming more discerning. And discernment is perhaps one of the most valuable forms of wealth a person can possess. Money can be lost and earned again. Possessions can be replaced. But poor judgment can create consequences that are much harder to reverse. That is why investing in your ability to think clearly is so important. Read reliable information. Ask professionals. Reflect on your values. Learn from mistakes. Surround yourself with people who respect your boundaries. Do not allow the loudest person in the room to become the authority over your life. Your health decisions belong to you, but that does not mean you have to make them alone. There is a difference between personal responsibility and isolation. Responsible people know when to seek help. A physician, nurse, sexual health clinic, counselor, or other qualified professional may provide information that friends simply cannot. Seeking help does not mean that you have failed. It means you recognize the value of expertise. And sometimes the most courageous sentence a person can say is, "I need help." We should celebrate that sentence rather than stigmatize it. If you are worried about an exposure, seek appropriate medical advice. If you are experiencing symptoms, get evaluated. If you are dealing with pressure or coercion, reach out to someone you trust and consider professional support. If you are frightened about a pregnancy or possible infection, do not let shame keep you alone with the fear. There are professionals whose job is to help people navigate these situations. Finally, I want to return to the concept of freedom. Freedom is not simply the ability to do whatever you want. Freedom is the ability to make choices based on knowledge rather than manipulation, values rather than pressure, and long-term purpose rather than momentary fear. That kind of freedom requires discipline. It requires learning. It requires boundaries. It requires the courage to walk away from situations that threaten your well-being. Think of your life as a portfolio. Your health is one asset. Your relationships are another. Your career is another. Your finances are another. Your mental and emotional well-being are another. A wise person does not sacrifice the entire portfolio for one short-term gain. They seek balance. They understand that a decision that appears profitable in one area can create enormous losses in another. A relationship that provides excitement but destroys your health is not a successful investment. A career that pays well but leaves you physically and emotionally broken may not be true wealth. A lifestyle that looks impressive but requires financial dependence and personal compromise may not be freedom. True wealth is the ability to build a life in which the different parts of you support rather than sabotage one another. So, as we continue this journey, remember that sexual health is not an isolated subject. It is connected to communication, confidence, responsibility, relationships, prevention, and the future you are building. The more informed you become, the more deliberate your choices can be, and the more deliberate your choices become, the less likely you are to surrender your future to someone else's pressure or to a momentary impulse. Carry this thought with you. The richest life is not the life with the most possessions. It is the life in which your health, values, relationships, and resources work together to give you genuine freedom. Protect that wealth. Learn about it. Talk about it. Invest in it. And never be ashamed to ask for the information you need to make a responsible decision, because when you learn to respect your body, respect another person's boundaries, understand risk, communicate honestly, and plan for the future, you are doing more than protecting yourself from problems. You are developing a skill that will serve you in every part of life, the ability to choose with your eyes open, and a person who can choose with their eyes open is much harder to manipulate, much better prepared for uncertainty, and far more capable of creating a future on their own terms. There is a stage in life when we begin to understand that taking care of ourselves is not something we do only when a problem appears. Real health is built long before the emergency. It is built in the quiet decisions nobody applauds, the appointment we schedule, the question we finally ask, the boundary we communicate, the protection we use, the habit we change, the relationship we reconsider, and the information we take the time to understand. These decisions may seem ordinary when we make them, but together they create the foundation upon which our future rests. When we talk about sexual health, therefore, we are not talking about one isolated part of the body or one particular kind of relationship. We are talking about prevention, awareness, dignity, communication, and the ability to recognize that your future deserves protection today. Prevention is one of those words that sounds almost as simple. Yet some of the most powerful principles in life are simple precisely because they work. In finance, prevention might mean maintaining an emergency fund so that one unexpected expense does not become a financial catastrophe. It might mean checking your credit report, reading a contract before signing it, or refusing to take on debt simply to impress other people. In health, prevention means learning what risks exist, understanding what steps can reduce them, and seeking appropriate professional care before a small concern becomes a larger one. Prevention does not guarantee that nothing difficult will ever happen. It gives you a stronger position from which to respond when life does not go according to plan. Consider how differently people behave when they believe a problem cannot happen to them. They may think sexually transmitted infections happen only to certain kinds of people. Unintended pregnancy happens only to careless people. Relationship abuse happens only to strangers. Or health complications happen only to those who already appear unhealthy. These assumptions are dangerous because they confuse identity with risk. Health risks do not always announce themselves according to the categories we create in our minds. A person can look healthy and still have an infection. A person can be intelligent and still make an impulsive decision. A successful professional can find themselves in an unhealthy relationship. Someone who has always been responsible can face an unexpected medical problem. The mature response is not to assume, "That could never happen to me." It is to say, "I understand that life contains risks, so I will make informed choices." This is exactly how an experienced investor thinks. An investor does not say, "This company looks successful, therefore there is no risk." They ask questions. What is the downside? What information am I missing? What would happen if circumstances changed? How much can I afford to lose? What can I do to protect myself? Good health decisions deserve the same intellectual discipline. We should not become frightened of every possible risk, but neither should we pretend risk does not exist. One of the most practical ways to reduce sexual health risks is to understand protection and use it consistently and correctly when appropriate. Condoms and other barrier methods can reduce the risk of many sexually transmitted infections and pregnancy. Although they do not eliminate every possible risk, contraceptive methods can also reduce the likelihood of pregnancy when used appropriately, and different methods suit different people. Some require daily attention, some are longer acting, some are barrier-based, and some may not be medically suitable for particular individuals. This is why conversations with qualified healthcare professionals matter. There is no prize for pretending that one method is automatically right for everyone. Good healthcare recognizes individual circumstances. Testing is another part of responsible prevention. People sometimes associate testing with suspicion, shame, or wrongdoing. But testing is simply information, and information is power. A financial statement tells you where your money stands. A health test can tell you something about your health status. Neither document is a moral judgment. A number on a bank statement does not determine whether you are a good person, and a medical result does not determine your worth. It tells you something you can use to make decisions. That perspective can change the emotional atmosphere around testing. Instead of saying, "Why do you want me to get tested? Don't you trust me?" we can say, "Let's both understand our health status so we can make informed decisions." That is not an accusation. It is partnership. When two people are willing to discuss testing openly, they are acknowledging that care sometimes means doing things that are not particularly romantic, but are deeply responsible. There is another reason testing and healthcare deserve normalization. Many health conditions can be easier to manage when identified earlier. That does not mean every symptom or every test result indicates a serious condition. It means that uncertainty is not a strategy. If something concerns you, seek appropriate medical advice. If you are unsure which screening is recommended for you, ask a healthcare professional. Medical recommendations vary according to age, anatomy, medical history, sexual practices, pregnancy status, medications, and other factors. The right question is not, "What test does everyone need?" It is, "What preventive care is appropriate for me?" This is a profound financial freedom principle as well. Personalize the plan. A retirement strategy that works for one person may be completely unsuitable for another. Someone with a high income, low debt, and decades before retirement has different priorities from someone approaching retirement with significant obligations. Health works the same way. Your body, history, circumstances, and goals matter. General information is useful, but individualized medical guidance is better when you need to make a health decision. And let us not underestimate the importance of vaccination. Some sexually transmitted infections can be prevented or reduced through vaccination, depending on the infection and an individual's circumstances. Human papillomavirus, for example, is a common infection for which vaccination can provide important protection against certain HPV-related diseases. Recommendations vary by age and circumstance, so people should discuss vaccination with an appropriate healthcare professional. The broader lesson is that modern healthcare gives us preventive tools that previous generations did not have. Using those tools when appropriate is not fearfulness. It is taking advantage of knowledge. Imagine if someone offered you a technology that could protect an important financial asset at relatively little cost, and you rejected it simply because your grandparents never used it. That would make little sense. Medical knowledge evolves in the same way. We honor previous generations not by refusing new information, but by using what we have learned to live healthier lives. There is also a quieter aspect of sexual health that deserves our attention: mental and emotional well-being. Physical health and emotional health are not separate planets. Stress can affect relationships. Relationship conflict can affect sleep. Anxiety can affect sexual functioning. Depression can affect desire and intimacy. Shame can prevent people from seeking healthcare. A person who feels trapped, pressured, or unsafe may struggle to make decisions clearly. That is why a holistic view of health matters. Sometimes the right next step is a medical appointment. Sometimes it is a conversation with a counselor. Sometimes it is reaching out to a trusted person. Sometimes it is leaving an unsafe environment. We should never underestimate the psychological cost of living against our own values. When your actions repeatedly conflict with what you believe is right for you, internal tension can grow. You may feel anxious, resentful, confused, or disconnected from yourself. This does not mean that every uncomfortable decision is wrong. Growth can be uncomfortable, but there is a difference between the discomfort of growth and the distress of repeatedly violating your own boundaries. Your values can function like a financial compass. A budget is not designed to tell you that you cannot enjoy life. It is designed to help your spending reflect what matters to you. In the same way, personal values can help your choices reflect the life you want to build. If health, trust, commitment, independence, family, or emotional security are important to you, your decisions should have some connection to those priorities. Otherwise, you may wake up years later with a life that was built primarily around other people's expectations. That leads to one of the most difficult lessons about relationships. You cannot build a healthy life by constantly performing for other people. There will always be someone with an opinion about your body, your relationships, your sexual choices, your finances, your career, or your timeline. Some advice will be valuable. Some will be careless. The challenge is to listen without surrendering your judgment. Financial independence teaches us to stop trying to impress people with money we do not have. Personal independence requires a similar discipline. Stop making personal choices simply to earn approval from people who will not live with the consequences. The person pressuring you will not necessarily be present when you face the medical appointment. The friend encouraging you to take a risk may not be there if something goes wrong. The stranger commenting online will not be responsible for your emotional recovery. Your life belongs to you. Here is a principle I want you to remember. Never hand the steering wheel of your future to someone who will not be there for the consequences. It is one of the most important rules of personal responsibility. Listen to advice, learn from others, seek professional guidance, but make decisions consciously. This becomes especially important when alcohol or drugs are involved. Substances can impair judgment, reduce inhibitions, and interfere with a person's ability to make or communicate decisions clearly. They can also make it harder to recognize whether another person is capable of giving meaningful consent. A responsible approach is to recognize that intoxication changes circumstances. If there is uncertainty about consent, the safest and most respectful response is to stop and wait until everyone is capable of making clear, voluntary decisions. There is nothing unromantic about protecting another person's autonomy. In fact, respect is one of the foundations of intimacy. When two people know that neither will be pressured, manipulated, or punished for saying no, they can communicate more honestly. Security creates openness. Fear creates silence. And we need to talk about safety beyond physical health. Some relationships contain controlling behavior that may initially be disguised as affection. A person may demand access to your phone, monitor your location, isolate you from friends, control your money, pressure you sexually, threaten you, or repeatedly make you feel guilty for having boundaries. These behaviors should not be romanticized as proof of love. control is not love. Fear is not intimacy. Jealousy is not automatically evidence of passion. Financial control deserves special attention because money can become a tool of coercion. Someone who controls another person's access to money may make it difficult for them to leave an unhealthy relationship. This is why financial independence can contribute to personal safety. Having your own bank account where appropriate, understanding your financial situation, maintaining access to important documents, building savings when possible, and developing employable skills can provide options. These steps are not about expecting every relationship to fail. They are about recognizing that independence creates resilience. This is one of the most important financial principles I could offer anyone. An emergency fund is not only money saved for an emergency. It is options saved for a moment when options matter. The same philosophy applies to personal independence, education, skills, supportive relationships, access to healthcare, and financial resources all create options, and options can change the balance of power in a difficult situation. If someone is experiencing sexual coercion or abuse, the answer is not simply be stronger. People may face complex emotional, financial, social, cultural, or physical barriers. The appropriate response is support, not blame. If you or someone you know is experiencing abuse or immediate danger, reaching out to a trusted person, qualified professional, local support service, or emergency service may be important depending on the circumstances. Safety should come before appearances. There is tremendous power in building a support network before you need it. Think about your financial life again. If your only source of money disappears, you are vulnerable. If your only source of emotional support is one person, you may also become vulnerable. Healthy friendships, family relationships, professional contacts, community organizations, and healthcare relationships can create a broader network of support. Independence does not mean needing nobody. It means having enough internal and external resources that one person does not control your entire world. Another essential part of sexual health is learning to recognize when professional care is necessary. Severe pain, significant bleeding, symptoms that are persistent or concerning, possible exposure to an infection, pregnancy-related concerns, or any situation involving assault or coercion deserves appropriate professional attention. Some situations may require urgent care. Others may be suitable for a routine appointment. The important thing is not to diagnose yourself from a speech or a search result. Get individualized medical guidance when you need it. This is where humility becomes a strength. We live in an age where information is everywhere, and that can create the illusion that expertise is unnecessary. Search engines can give you thousands of pages in seconds. Social media can give you a confident stranger's opinion in 15 seconds, but information without context can mislead. A qualified professional can consider your specific circumstances, ask follow-up questions, examine you when appropriate, and interpret information in context. One of the smartest investments you can make is knowing who deserves your trust. Not every source is equally reliable. Ask whether the information comes from a qualified medical organization, healthcare professional, public health authority, or established evidence-based resource. Be cautious when someone promises miracle cures, guarantees, secret solutions, or claims that established medical advice is simply a conspiracy. In both health and finance, extraordinary claims deserve extraordinary scrutiny. The same critical thinking skill protects you in both areas. If someone promises you can double your money overnight with no risk, you should be suspicious. If someone promises a magical health solution that replaces professional care, you should also be suspicious. If someone insists that one product, supplement, technique, or internet trick can solve every problem, ask questions. Responsible people do not surrender their judgment simply because a claim is delivered confidently. There is another lesson here about patience. We live in an instant culture, instant messaging, instant entertainment, instant purchases, instant information. But some of the most important outcomes in life cannot be rushed. Building trust takes time. Developing financial security takes time. Understanding your health takes time. Recovering from emotional pain takes time. Creating a healthy relationship takes time. The desire for instant results can tempt people into shortcuts that create longer-term problems. A financial investor understands compounding. Small contributions can become significant over time. Health habits compound too. A single healthy choice may seem insignificant, but repeated responsible choices can create meaningful benefits. Likewise, small neglect can compound into larger problems. The person who repeatedly ignores symptoms, repeatedly avoids difficult conversations, repeatedly disregards boundaries, and repeatedly postpones preventive care may eventually face a problem that could have been addressed earlier. So ask yourself, what are you repeating? Because your repeated choices are quietly writing your future. If you repeatedly choose people who disrespect your boundaries, you may eventually begin to believe disrespect is normal. If you repeatedly postpone healthcare, avoidance may become your default response. If you repeatedly spend beyond your means, financial stress may become part of your identity. But the opposite is also true. If you repeatedly choose honesty, responsibility, learning, and self-respect, those qualities become easier to practice. Habits become character, and character influences destiny. That is why I want you to see every responsible sexual health decision as more than a single decision. It is a vote for the person you are becoming. When you communicate honestly, you vote for integrity. When you respect consent, you vote for dignity. When you seek medical advice, you vote for your future health. When you use appropriate protection, you vote for prevention. When you walk away from coercion, you vote for self-respect. When you build financial independence, you vote for freedom. And those votes accumulate. You do not need to transform your entire life tonight. You simply need to identify the next responsible step. Maybe it is scheduling an overdue health appointment. Maybe it is learning about contraception from a qualified professional. Maybe it is getting appropriate testing. Maybe it is having a difficult conversation with a partner. Maybe it is recognizing that a relationship is unhealthy. Maybe it is beginning to save money so that you have greater independence. Maybe it is simply admitting that you have questions and deciding to find reliable answers. Do not underestimate the power of one next step. Here is the quote I want to leave you with. A better future is rarely built in one dramatic moment. It is built in ordinary moments when you choose what protects tomorrow. That is the heart of prevention. It is also the heart of financial freedom. Save before the emergency. Learn before the crisis. Communicate before resentment grows. Seek care before fear becomes paralysis. Establish boundaries before they are tested. Prepare before you need the preparation. Your life is not a collection of isolated decisions. It is a system. Your physical health affects your emotional health. Your emotional health affects your relationships. Your relationships can affect your finances. Your finances can affect your ability to access healthcare and leave unhealthy circumstances. Your health can affect your career. Your career can affect your financial security. Everything connects. That is why taking care of your sexual health is not a narrow act. It is part of taking care of your entire life. So let us reject the idea that responsible health choices are restrictive. Responsibility is not a cage. It is a key. It opens the door to greater confidence, better communication, healthier relationships, and more choices. It allows you to say yes with greater understanding and no with greater confidence. It helps you recognize when a situation deserves patience, when it deserves a conversation, and when it deserves professional help. And perhaps most importantly, it reminds you that your future is not something that simply happens to you. You participate in creating it. You may not control every circumstance. You cannot predict every illness, every relationship, every financial event, or every unexpected turn, but you can control whether you learn. You can control whether you ask questions. You can control whether you seek help. You can control whether you respect your own boundaries and the boundaries of others. You can control whether you prepare. That is where personal power begins. The world will always offer you shortcuts. It will offer instant gratification, easy answers, seductive promises, and people who tell you that thinking about consequences is unnecessary. But you do not have to accept every invitation the world gives you. You can choose a slower, wiser path. You can choose knowledge over rumor, preparation over panic, respect over pressure, and long-term freedom over short-term approval. Remember, your health is an asset, your knowledge is an asset, your boundaries are an asset, and your ability to choose wisely is an asset. Protect all four. When you do, you are not merely avoiding problems. You are building the kind of life in which your decisions serve your goals rather than undermine them, and that is the true meaning of taking responsibility for your sexual health. It is not about living in fear. It is about living awake. It is about knowing enough to make informed choices, caring enough to protect yourself and others, and valuing your future enough to refuse decisions that could steal opportunities from the person you are becoming. Because the future version of you is already depending on the choices you make today. There comes a time when knowledge must become action. We can read, listen, discuss, and collect information forever, but information only becomes powerful when it changes the way we live. Knowing that your health matters is important. Taking an appointment seriously is more important. Understanding boundaries is valuable. Communicating them when the moment comes is where courage appears. Knowing that financial independence matters is useful. Saving the first amount of money, however small, is where the journey begins. In every important area of life, there is a distance between knowing and doing. That distance is where many dreams disappear. It is also where many lives are transformed. Sexual health is one of those areas in which action often begins with something remarkably ordinary. A conversation, not a dramatic speech, not a confrontation, just a conversation. To people sitting down and saying, what do we both want? What are we comfortable with? How are we going to protect our health? What do we need to know? What happens if our circumstances change? These questions may not sound romantic in the way movies portray romance, but real intimacy is not a movie scene. Real intimacy involves the complete human beings bringing their histories, expectations, fears, values, health conditions, boundaries, and hopes into the same space. The stronger the communication, the safer that space can become. We sometimes imagine that talking about sexual health will destroy spontaneity. In reality, uncertainty is often what creates anxiety. When people know they can speak honestly, they do not have to spend as much energy guessing. They can ask instead of assuming. They can clarify instead of interpreting. They can pause instead of pretending. They can say what they need without turning the conversation into a battle. This is a form of freedom. You are no longer controlled by what you are afraid the other person might think. The same principle applies to money. Financially healthy couples do not become financially secure by refusing to discuss money because it might feel uncomfortable. They discuss income, spending, debt, savings, goals, and expectations. They discover where they agree and where they differ. They make decisions together when appropriate. They understand that avoiding a difficult conversation does not eliminate the financial reality. It simply postpones it. Relationships work the same way. If an issue matters enough to affect your future, it matters enough to discuss. One of the most useful principles I can give you is this: if a subject can change your future, it deserves a conversation before it changes your future for you. Think about the power of that statement. Pregnancy can change a future. An untreated infection can affect health. A pattern of coercion can damage emotional well-being. Financial dependence can limit choices. These are not subjects that should be left to chance when honest preparation is possible. Of course, not every conversation will be easy. Some people become defensive. Some avoid difficult topics. Some have never learned how to communicate respectfully. Some people use anger to escape accountability. That is why communication is not simply about finding the perfect words. It is also about observing the response. When you express a reasonable concern, does the other person listen? When you establish a boundary, do they respect it? When you ask for information, do they answer honestly? When you say you need time, do they give you time? When you disagree, can you remain safe? The answer to these questions can tell you a great deal about the health of a relationship. A healthy relationship does not require two people to agree on everything. In fact, no meaningful relationship can survive on permanent agreement. People will have different preferences, expectations, values, and experiences. What matters is how differences are handled. Respect does not mean agreement. Respect means recognizing that the other person has the right to exist as a separate human being with their own decisions and boundaries. That distinction becomes especially important around intimacy. You are not entitled to another person's body because you are dating them. You are not entitled to intimacy because you paid for dinner. You are not entitled to it because you are married. You are not entitled to it because you were intimate yesterday. Consent is not something one person earns through a relationship title. It is an ongoing expression of mutual willingness, and the same principle applies to you. You do not owe intimacy because someone loves you. You do not owe it because you are afraid they will leave. You do not owe it because you agreed earlier. You do not owe it because someone tells you that everyone else does it. Your body is not a payment you make to maintain a relationship. There is enormous financial wisdom hidden in that idea. We teach people not to spend money they cannot afford simply because they fear disappointing someone. Yet many people apply no equivalent rule to their personal boundaries. They are willing to compromise their health, comfort, or values because they are afraid of another person's reaction. But a healthy relationship cannot be built on emotional debt. If you constantly give away pieces of yourself because you fear losing someone, eventually you may discover that you have preserved the relationship while losing yourself. That is not freedom. Financial independence teaches us to build assets that give us choices. Personal independence requires building internal assets as well: confidence, knowledge, communication skills, emotional resilience, and boundaries. The more of these assets you develop, the less likely you are to believe that you must accept harmful treatment simply because you cannot imagine being alone. Being alone and being lonely are not the same thing. A person can be surrounded by people and still feel profoundly alone. Another person can spend time alone and feel peaceful, capable, and complete. The quality of your relationship with yourself matters. If you learn to enjoy your own company, develop your skills, maintain friendships, care for your health, and build financial stability, you reduce the fear that can make unhealthy relationships seem impossible to leave. This is why financial freedom and relationship freedom can reinforce each other. If you have no savings, no income, no skills, and no support network, you may feel trapped when a relationship becomes unhealthy. That does not mean every person with financial dependence is in danger, nor does financial independence solve every relationship problem. But having resources can increase options. Learning a skill can increase options. Maintaining a trusted support network can increase options. Understanding your finances can increase options. And options are powerful. Here is another principle to remember. The purpose of building independence is not to prepare for abandonment. It is to make sure that love remains a choice rather than a necessity. That is a profound difference. When two people choose each other while both retain the ability to stand independently, the relationship can be built more strongly on affection, trust, and shared purpose rather than fear. This does not mean that relationships should become transactions. Love cannot be reduced to spreadsheets. People support one another. They share resources. They make sacrifices. They care for one another during illness, unemployment, pregnancy, parenting, grief, and countless other circumstances. Financial independence is not about refusing to depend on anyone. It is about ensuring that dependence does not become a weapon. That is why financial literacy belongs in conversations about personal well-being. Know what accounts you have. Understand your income and expenses. Keep track of important documents. Build savings when you can. Understand shared financial obligations. Be cautious about taking on debt for someone else's lifestyle. If you are entering a long-term partnership, discuss financial expectations honestly. Money can be one of the most common sources of relationship conflict, and secrecy can magnify that conflict. The same honesty should apply to health. If you know about a health condition that could materially affect another person's sexual health or pregnancy decisions, appropriate disclosure and medical guidance matter. The exact obligations can vary according to the situation and local law, but the ethical principle is straightforward. Do not deliberately hide information that another person reasonably needs in order to make an informed decision about their health. Truth is one of the foundations of trust, but truth also requires compassion. If someone discloses a health condition, the response should not automatically be disgust, ridicule, or rejection. Many health conditions are manageable. Some are common. Some can be treated. Some can be prevented from being transmitted with appropriate medical care and precautions. A diagnosis is information, not a verdict on a person's character. This is why stigma can be so dangerous. When people fear being judged, they may avoid testing. They may avoid treatment. They may hide symptoms. They may avoid conversations with partners. Stigma can therefore contribute to the very problems that education is trying to reduce. Compassion is not merely a kindness. In some circumstances, it can support better health behavior. Imagine what would happen if we treated health information the way we treat financial information. Suppose a person discovered that their credit score had fallen. We would not necessarily tell them, "You are a terrible human being," we would say, "Let's understand what happened and determine what can be done." If a person receives a health diagnosis, we can use the same constructive mindset, understand it, get appropriate care, learn what it means, and make informed decisions. That approach also makes room for mistakes. Everyone makes them. A person may have ignored advice, trusted someone they should not have trusted, misunderstood a risk, or simply lacked adequate information. Accountability means learning from the mistake, not spending the rest of your life proving that you deserve punishment. One of my favorite principles of financial recovery is that a bad financial decision does not have to become a bad financial identity. If you overspent, you can change your habits. If you accumulated debt, you can create a repayment plan. If you failed to save, you can begin now. The past may create consequences, but it does not have to dictate every future decision. The same is true in health and relationships. Perhaps you did not protect yourself in the past. Perhaps you ignored a symptom. Perhaps you remained in an unhealthy relationship longer than you wish you had. Perhaps you were too embarrassed to ask questions. Perhaps you believed information that turned out to be false. You cannot rewrite yesterday, but you can change what you do next. That is where hope lives. Hope is not pretending that consequences do not exist. Hope is believing that responsible action can still improve what comes next. Sometimes the next step is medical. Sometimes it is emotional. Sometimes it is financial. Sometimes it is relational. Sometimes it is all for . And sometimes the most important decision is to stop making excuses for behavior that repeatedly harms you. We need to be especially careful about confusing forgiveness with permission. You can forgive someone and still establish a boundary. You can love someone and still leave. You can understand someone's difficult past and still refuse to allow them to harm you. Compassion does not require surrender. Empathy does not require unlimited access. That is another financial principle worth carrying into relationships. Generosity without boundaries can become a liability. In finance, if you continually give beyond your means, you eventually weaken your own ability to help anyone. In relationships, if you continually sacrifice your safety, health, values, or dignity, you may eventually have nothing left to give. Healthy generosity has limits. Healthy love has boundaries. We also need to talk about self-care without turning it into selfishness. Caring for yourself does not mean ignoring everyone else. It means recognizing that you cannot contribute your best when you consistently neglect your own well-being. A person who never rests eventually becomes exhausted. A person who never speaks eventually becomes resentful. A person who never seeks healthcare eventually increases uncertainty. A person who never examines their finances may eventually become overwhelmed. Self-care is maintenance, and maintenance protects capacity. Think about a successful business. It cannot operate indefinitely without maintenance. Equipment needs servicing. Accounts need review. Systems need updating. Problems need to be addressed before they become catastrophic. Your life deserves the same attention. Your body needs care. Your relationships need communication. Your finances need review. Your mental health needs attention. Your values need reflection. Maintenance may not be exciting, but it is one of the reasons success lasts. This is especially important as people move through different stages of life. Sexual health does not stop being relevant when someone reaches a certain age. Bodies change, hormones change, relationships change, fertility changes, medications change, health conditions can change. The questions that matter at one stage of life may not be the same questions that matter at another. A responsible person continues learning. We should never assume that aging automatically removes the need for sexual health education. Older adults can experience sexually transmitted infections, relationship concerns, changes in sexual function, medication-related effects, and other health issues just as younger adults can. The appropriate response is not embarrassment, it is informed care. Likewise, young people deserve age-appropriate, accurate health education rather than silence. Education should emphasize safety, consent, boundaries, healthy relationships, and reliable information. Young people should understand that they can ask questions without being shamed. Adults have a responsibility to create environments in which health questions can be answered responsibly. Silence does not protect people from reality. It simply ensures that they encounter reality without preparation. And preparation is one of the most powerful forms of love we can give another person. When you teach someone how to recognize an unhealthy relationship, you are preparing them. When you teach them to respect consent, you are preparing them. When you teach them to seek medical care, you are preparing them. When you teach them financial literacy, you are preparing them. When you teach them that their worth does not depend on another person's approval, you are preparing them for freedom. This is why I believe education is one of the highest return investments in life. Money invested can grow. Education invested can multiply through every decision you make afterward. A dollar can be spent once. Knowledge can influence thousands of decisions. And health knowledge is particularly powerful because it can change not only your life but potentially the lives of the people who trust you. Imagine a family in which people can talk openly about health. Imagine parents who teach children that bodies deserve respect. Imagine partners who discuss testing and protection without shame. Imagine adults who seek professional care instead of relying entirely on rumors. Imagine people who understand that financial independence can be part of personal safety. Imagine communities where abuse is taken seriously and victims are supported rather than blamed. That is bigger than individual wellness. That is culture change. But culture change begins with individuals. It begins when one person decides that an uncomfortable subject deserves an honest conversation. It begins when someone says, "I need to learn more." It begins when a person refuses to laugh at someone for asking a health question. It begins when a partner says, "Your boundary matters to me." It begins when someone saves their first emergency fund because they want greater independence. It begins when a person realizes that their future deserves protection. These may seem like small actions, but small actions are how large changes begin. There is a financial concept called compounding, and I want to borrow it for life. One small amount of money invested repeatedly can eventually become substantial because growth builds upon previous growth. Personal habits compound in exactly the same way. One honest conversation makes the next honest conversation easier. One boundary strengthens the confidence to set another. One appointment makes preventive care feel less intimidating. 1 month of saving can become a year of saving. One responsible decision can become a pattern of responsibility. Never underestimate the first step because it looks small. The person who becomes financially secure may begin by saving a modest amount. The person who becomes healthier may begin by making one appointment. The person who leaves an unhealthy relationship may begin by telling one trusted person what is happening. The person who becomes confident may begin by asking one question. The person who protects their future may begin by saying no once. A life can change direction through a single decision repeated consistently. And this is why I want you to think differently about discipline. Discipline is not punishment. Discipline is remembering what matters when the immediate moment tries to distract you, when you are tempted to spend money you need for something more important. Discipline remembers your goal when you are pressured to cross a boundary. Discipline remembers your values when you want to ignore a health concern because an appointment feels inconvenient. Discipline remembers your future when someone offers you a shortcut that seems too good to be true. Discipline remembers to ask questions. Discipline is simply loyalty to your long-term priorities. That is one of the most beautiful definitions of maturity. I know, becoming loyal to the person you are trying to become. So ask yourself, who am I becoming? Not, what does everyone expect me to become? Not, what will make this person happy tonight? Not, what would look impressive on social media? Who are you becoming? Are you becoming someone who communicates honestly? Someone who respects boundaries? Someone who seeks accurate information? Someone who protects their health? Someone who manages money responsibly? Someone who can walk away from harmful situations? Someone who can ask for help? Someone who can admit, I was wrong? Someone who can say, I don't know, but I will find out. Those qualities are forms of wealth. And no one can take them from you simply by changing their mind about you. As we approach the final part of this journey, I want you to remember that sexual health is ultimately about more than prevention. It is about agency. It is about being an active participant in your own life. It is about understanding that your body, health, relationships, resources, and future deserve deliberate attention. You are not powerless. You may not control every circumstance, but you have more choices than fear sometimes. Allows you to see. You can learn. You can ask. You can pause. You can protect. You can communicate. You can seek help. You can change direction. You can build financial independence. You can strengthen your support network. You can leave situations that are unsafe. You can begin again. Let me leave you with one final principle for this part. Do not measure your progress by how perfect your past has been. Measure it by whether today's choices are moving you toward a healthier tomorrow. That is how wealth is built. That is how trust is built. That is how confidence is built. That is how a healthy life is built. One responsible choice at a time. And when you begin to see your health, relationships, finances, and future as connected parts of the same life, something changes. You stop treating each problem separately and start building a system of protection around the person you are becoming. You begin to understand that prevention is not fear. Boundaries are not rejection. Financial independence is not selfishness. And asking for help is not weakness. They are all expressions of the same idea. You believe your future is worth protecting. And when you truly believe that, your decisions begin to change. There is a moment at the end of every important journey when we realize that the destination was never simply a place we were trying to reach. The journey changed us. We began with questions, perhaps with uncertainty, perhaps even with discomfort, and somewhere along the way we discovered that the subject we were discussing was much larger than we first imagined. Sexual health is not simply about one medical issue, one relationship, one decision, or one stage of life. It is about the way we value ourselves. It is about how we treat other people. It is about our willingness to learn, our courage to communicate, our ability to recognize risk, our readiness to seek help, and our commitment to protect the future we are building. And when we connect those lessons with financial independence, an even deeper truth appears. Freedom is created when knowledge, responsibility, health, and resources work together. I want you to think back to the beginning of this journey and remember the question we started with. What does it really mean to be healthy? Perhaps now the answer feels different. Health is not simply the absence of disease. It is not merely a number on a medical report. It is not a body that looks a certain way. It is the ability to understand yourself, care for yourself, recognize when something needs attention, and make informed decisions about your well-being. Sexual health belongs inside that larger picture because it touches physical health, emotional health, relationships, reproductive choices, prevention, communication, consent, and personal dignity. When we treat sexual health as a legitimate part of healthcare rather than an embarrassing subject, we make room for better questions and better decisions, and better questions can change lives. Imagine someone who has spent years believing that asking for help is a sign of weakness. They ignore symptoms because they are embarrassed. They avoid difficult conversations because they fear judgment. They accept pressure because they do not want to disappoint someone. They remain financially dependent because they believe independence is impossible. Their world gradually becomes smaller, not because they consciously chose a smaller life, but because fear quietly made the decisions for them. Now imagine that same person learning a different way to live. They discover that asking a healthcare professional a question is an act of responsibility. They learn that consent can be discussed openly. They realize that a boundary does not require an apology. They begin saving a little money. They learn a new skill. They reconnect with supportive people. They become willing to say, "I am not comfortable with this." They learn to say, "I need more information." They discover that no is a complete sentence and that I need help is not a confession of failure. Nothing magical happened overnight, but their life began to change because their choices change. That is the real power of education. Education does not promise a life without problems. It gives you a better vocabulary for facing them. It gives you questions to ask. It gives you warning signs to recognize. It gives you options to consider. It gives you the confidence to seek appropriate professional help, and it gives you the ability to distinguish what you know from what you merely assume. That distinction can protect you in almost every area of life. In finance, assumptions can be expensive. Assuming you can afford something because the monthly payment looks small can lead to years of debt. Assuming an investment is safe because someone on the internet says so can lead to serious losses. Assuming a contract is harmless because you trust the person offering it can create problems later. Financially intelligent people learn to verify. They read, they ask, they compare, they understand the consequences before committing. Your health deserves the same level of intelligence. Do not assume that someone looks healthy, therefore they cannot have an infection. Do not assume that a relationship title automatically guarantees respect. Do not assume that a person who says they love you will automatically honor your boundaries. Do not assume that an online post is accurate because it has thousands of likes. Do not assume that an uncomfortable symptom will disappear simply because you are embarrassed to discuss it. Do not assume that your future will take care of itself. Assumptions are shortcuts, and shortcuts are not always efficient. Sometimes they simply move the consequences farther down the road. A mature life is built on informed choices. That is why I want you to become comfortable with the phrase, "Let me find out." Let me find out what this symptom means. Let me find out what prevention options are available. Let me find out what testing is recommended for me. Let me find out what my healthcare professional thinks. Let me find out what this financial commitment will really cost. Let me find out what my rights and options are. Let me find out whether this relationship is actually healthy. There is no shame in not knowing. The real danger is believing you know when you have never taken the time to learn. One of the greatest misconceptions about confidence is that confident people always have answers. In reality, confident people are often the most comfortable acknowledging uncertainty. They do not need to pretend. They can say, "I don't know." They can ask an expert. They can reconsider. They can change their mind. They can admit a mistake. That is not weakness. That is intellectual strength. And intellectual strength is a form of freedom. When you know how to learn, you are less dependent on whoever happens to be speaking the loudest. When you know how to evaluate information, you are less vulnerable to manipulation. When you understand your finances, you are less vulnerable to financial control. When you understand your health, you are better prepared to participate in your own health care. When you understand consent and boundaries, you are better equipped to recognize respectful relationships. Knowledge does not make you invincible. It makes you harder to deceive. That is why learning should never stop. Your sexual health needs may change as you move through life. Your relationships may change. Your body may change. Your reproductive goals may change. Your medications may change. Your health risks may change. Your financial circumstances may change. The plan that worked 5 years ago not be the right plan today. That is not failure. That is life. A good financial plan is reviewed and adjusted because circumstances change. A good health strategy is also reviewed and adjusted because circumstances change. Flexibility is not inconsistency. It is responsiveness to reality. There is a beautiful financial principle called rebalancing. An investor periodically examines their portfolio and adjusts it so that it still reflects their goals and risk tolerance. We should do the same thing with our lives. Ask yourself periodically, is this relationship still healthy? Are my boundaries still clear? Am I taking care of my physical health? Have I been postponing a medical appointment? Do I understand my current financial situation? Am I building savings? Do I have people I can trust? Am I living according to my values? Am I making choices because I genuinely want them, or because I am afraid of disappointing someone? These questions are not signs that something is wrong. They are maintenance, and maintenance is how we protect what matters. Sometimes, however, a review reveals something we do not want to see. Maybe a relationship is unhealthy. Maybe your finances are unstable. Maybe your health needs attention. Maybe you have been ignoring a boundary violation. Maybe you have been living according to someone else's expectations for years. What happens then? You begin where you are, not where you wish you were, not where you think you should have been. Where you are. This may be one of the most important principles of personal growth. You cannot change the chapter you already lived, but you can decide what the next chapter will say. Your past may contain mistakes, heartbreak, embarrassment, poor decisions, unhealthy relationships, financial mistakes, or missed opportunities. But the past is information. It is not a life sentence. If you made a mistake with your health, learn from it. If you ignored your boundaries, strengthen them. If you trusted the wrong person, become more discerning. If you accumulated debt, create a plan. If you neglected savings, start now. If you avoided health care, make the appointment. If you have questions about sexual health, find a reliable source. If you are afraid, tell someone trustworthy. One next step can become the beginning of an entirely different future. This is why I do not want you to leave this conversation feeling frightened. Fear can motivate action for a short time, but understanding creates sustainable action. I want you to leave feeling capable. You are capable of learning. You are capable of asking. You are capable of setting boundaries. You are capable of seeking care. You are capable of making a financial plan. You are capable of changing unhealthy patterns. You are capable of saying no. You are capable of starting again. And you are capable of building a future that is not controlled by someone else's expectations. That future may not look exactly like the future you imagined when you were younger. Life rarely follows a perfect blueprint. But a meaningful future does not require perfection. It requires alignment. Your choices should increasingly reflect what you value. If you value health, protect it. If you value trust, practice honesty. If you value independence, build skills and resources. If you value family, communicate with care. If you value freedom, accept the responsibility that freedom requires. If you value dignity, refuse to treat yourself or another person as an object. These values become practical when they influence behavior, and that is where financial freedom enters the story one final time. People often imagine financial freedom as a finish line. They picture a number in a bank account, a paid-off house, or a retirement portfolio large enough that they never have to worry about money again. Those goals can be valuable, but true financial freedom is broader. It is the ability to make decisions without being constantly dominated by financial fear. Health freedom has a similar meaning. It does not mean that you will never become sick. It means you are developing the knowledge, habits, resources, and support necessary to respond to health challenges intelligently. Relationship freedom does not mean never experiencing heartbreak. It means you are able to choose relationships based on mutual respect rather than desperation. Emotional freedom does not mean never feeling fear. It means fear does not automatically get to make your decisions. These forms of freedom reinforce one another. A person with financial stability have greater access to health care and more options in difficult circumstances. A person with good health may have more capacity to work, learn, and pursue opportunities. A person with healthy relationships may have stronger emotional support during challenges. A person with strong boundaries may be less vulnerable to manipulation. A person with good information may make better decisions. This is what I mean when I say that your life is a portfolio. Do not invest everything in one area. Build health. Build knowledge. Build relationships. Build skills. Build savings. Build confidence. Build community. Build character. These assets may not all appear on a balance sheet, but they determine the quality of the life you are able to live. And remember, the goal is not to become rich in one area while becoming poor in every other area. The goal is to become wealthy in the things that make a life worth living. That is a different definition of wealth. A person can have money and still live in fear. A person can have a successful career and still have no boundaries. A person can have a beautiful home and still feel unsafe in their relationship. A person can have social status and still be ashamed to ask for health care. A person can have possessions and still lack freedom. So build the kind of wealth that protects your whole life. Build the confidence to speak. Build the knowledge to question. Build the discipline to prepare. Build the savings to create options. Build the relationships that respect you. Build the health habits that sustain you. Build the courage to walk away from what repeatedly harms you. That is wealth. And that is freedom. There is another lesson I want to leave with you, and it is about compassion. As we become more informed, we must resist the temptation to become judgmental toward people who know less than we do. Education should create humility, not superiority. You may know something today that someone else has never been taught. That does not make you better than them. It means you have an opportunity to help create a safer environment for learning. If someone asks a basic question, do not laugh. If someone receives a diagnosis, do not assume their character. If someone has experienced an unintended pregnancy, do not reduce their entire life to that event. If someone leaves an unhealthy relationship, do not ask why they stayed as though the answer were simple. If someone admits they made a poor decision, do not use their honesty as an opportunity to humiliate them. Teach. Listen. Support. Encourage professional care when appropriate. Human beings make mistakes. Human beings become frightened. Human beings misunderstand. Human beings sometimes need another chance. And perhaps the greatest expression of maturity is learning how to hold responsibility and compassion at the same time. We can say, that decision had consequences, without saying, you are worthless. We can say, you need to change this behavior, without saying, you are incapable of change. We can say, you need professional help, without saying, there is something wrong with you. We can encourage accountability without destroying dignity. That balance is essential, because shame rarely creates sustainable change. Understanding can. A person who understands why a behavior is harmful is more likely to change it than someone who has simply been humiliated for doing it. The same is true with money. A person who understands how debt works can change their financial habits. A person who is merely told that they are irresponsible may become defensive and hide the problem. Education opens the door. Responsibility walks through it. Support helps keep the door open. So, if you remember only a few things from this entire journey, remember these. Your body deserves respect. Your health deserves attention. Your questions deserve accurate answers. Your boundaries deserve respect. Consent must be voluntary and ongoing. Prevention is wiser than avoidable crisis. Testing and medical care are tools, not moral judgments. Reliable information is more valuable than confident misinformation. Healthy relationships make room for honest communication. Financial independence can increase personal options and resilience. Your past does not have to dictate your future. And asking for help is an act of strength. These are not complicated ideas, but they are powerful when practiced. Now I want you to imagine yourself 5 years from today. You wake up one morning and realize that the person you are now is the result of thousands of small decisions. Some are financial, some are health-related, some involve relationships, some involved what you learned, some involved what you refused to tolerate. Your future self may not remember every conversation you had tonight, but your future self will live with the results of the choices you make after hearing it. That is why your future deserves a seat at the table. Whenever you make a major decision, ask your future self, will this choice protect my health? Will it respect my values? Will it preserve my options? Will it strengthen or weaken my financial independence? Will I be proud of how I treated the other person? Will I be able to live with the consequences? Do I have enough information? If I do not know, who can help me find out? Those questions can become a personal decision-making system. And systems are powerful. Financially successful people do not rely on motivation every morning to decide whether to save. They create systems. Healthy people do not rely entirely on inspiration to care for themselves. They create routines. People with healthy relationships do not wait until a crisis to communicate. They create habits of honesty. People who protect their boundaries do not decide from scratch every time someone pressures them. They know what their limits are. Create systems that protect the person you want to become. Make health appointments part of your routine. Learn from credible sources. Keep track of important health information. Talk openly with partners when appropriate. Build financial reserves when possible. Review your goals. Maintain supportive relationships. And periodically ask yourself whether the life you are building still reflects what matters to you. This is not about creating a perfect life. It is about creating a deliberate life. There will still be surprises. There will still be illness. There will still be heartbreak. There will still be financial setbacks. There will still be difficult conversations. But deliberate people are not defined by the absence of problems. They are defined by the way they respond when the unexpected happens. They seek information. When they make a mistake, they learn. When they become frightened, they reach for support. When a relationship becomes unhealthy, they recognize the warning signs. When money becomes tight, they examine the numbers. When their health changes, they seek appropriate care. They do not pretend life is always easy. They become better equipped to handle it. And that, perhaps, is the ultimate goal of everything we have discussed. Not perfection. Preparedness. Not fear. Awareness. Not control over everything. Control over the choices that are actually ours to make. Not dependence on approval. Self-respect. Not instant gratification. Long-term freedom. Let me leave you with one final original thought. Your future is built by the decisions you make when nobody is watching, the appointment you keep, the boundary you honor, the money you save, the truth you tell, and the risk you choose not to take. Those quiet decisions become your life. So take care of yourself. Ask the question. Make the appointment. Learn the facts. Have the conversation. Protect your health. Respect another person's boundaries. Protect your financial independence. Seek help when you need it. And if you discover that you have made mistakes along the way, do not surrender to shame. Take responsibility. Learn what you can, and move forward. You are allowed to become wiser. You are allowed to become healthier. You are allowed to become financially stronger. You are allowed to establish boundaries that did not exist before. You are allowed to leave what is harmful. You are allowed to begin again. There is no requirement that your future repeat your past. That may be the most liberating message of all. Your future is still being written. And every responsible choice you make today is another sentence in that story. Write it with knowledge. Write it with courage. Write it with compassion. Write it with self-respect. Write it with a long-term vision. Because genuine freedom is not simply having the ability to do whatever you want. Genuine freedom is having the wisdom to know what is worth doing, the courage to refuse what will harm you, the resources to create alternatives, and the self-respect to build a life that you do not constantly need to escape from. Take care of the body that carries your dreams. Take care of the mind that makes your decisions. Take care of the relationships that bring genuine support. Take care of the finances that create options. Take care of the future person who will one day look back at you and say, "Thank you for thinking of me." That is the legacy of responsible living. Not perfection. Not popularity. Not appearances. A life protected by knowledge, strengthened by discipline, enriched by healthy relationships, supported by financial wisdom, and guided by respect. And if there is one final principle I hope stays with you long after this conversation ends, let it be this: freedom grows wherever responsibility, knowledge, and self-respect meet. Protect that freedom. Invest in it. Practice it. And pass it forward, because your health is not separate from your future. Your relationships are not separate from your future. Your financial decisions are not separate from your future. They are all pieces of the same life, and that life is worth protecting.